Welcome to the October-November Monthly Economic Outlook presented by the McNair Center for the Advancement of Free Enterprise and Entrepreneurship at Northwood University in partnership with Midland Community Television. I'm your host, Mackenzie Kastl. Joining me today is our Senior Vice President, McNair Center Director, Dr. Timothy Nash. Dr. Nash, we have a special episode for you today. In lieu of presenting an Entrepreneur of the Month, we're going to expand a little bit on the Michigan Economic Competitiveness Study the McNair Center conducts for the Michigan Chamber Foundation. And we'll jump right in talking about the study. It landed in more than 250 outlets across the United States. Obviously, it's big news. What can you tell us about Michigan's competitiveness?
Well, Mackenzie, the 2018 study is our 7th annual study. And initially, when we introduced the study in 2012, Michigan was number 47 out of 50, so the state had a lot of things to render improved, and we're very pleased to report that that longitudinal study, which traces data from 1998 to 2018, Michigan's moved from 47 to 20th, and we have made great progress because of things like tax cuts, regulatory reform, etc. But maybe even more impressive is with last year's study, we began tracking the economy since 2011, so we could measure how well Governor Snyder had done as governor, starting to be able to measure different governors' terms. And Michigan is ranked this year number 8 in the country in terms of economic competitiveness. You know, we've been one of the top. We were for example, number 5 in the country in per capita GDP growth. Real per capita GDP growth from 2011 to 2017. Obviously, 2018 data isn't out yet. We are ranked the 11th most competitive corporate tax rate state, the 13th most competitive in terms of personal income, and recently a major economics measurement that's produced out of the state of Missouri ranks Michigan the 4th most cost of living friendly state in the country. So, you know, a lot of really good things happening in Michigan.
Wonderful. Now, when you look at the Great Lakes Bay region, you look at the states around us, how is Michigan in this area?
Michigan leads the Great Lakes Bay region, or not the Great Lakes Bay region, but the Great Lakes region. And when you look at specifically at the Great Lakes Bay within the state of Michigan, Midland is really the shining star. Midland has been one of the top performers in the country, and in terms of gross metropolitan areas over the last 4 or 5 years, Midland has been number 2 in the country in terms of per capita GDP growth, and that's out of 383 metropolitan areas, ranging from Detroit and New York City and Chicago to smaller communities. And I can't remember which community it was, but it was a relatively small town in Indiana that was number 1. I think it was Goshen, Indiana was number 1, and we were number 2 in terms of GDP growth over the last 6-7 years. So it's impressive to see what's happening both to Michigan at the national and the regional level, but certainly a number of areas like Michigan. Grand Rapids did extremely well in Michigan. Obviously, Midland was the cream of the crop.
What are some of the things here in Midland that contribute to that kind of growth?
Well, clearly a lot of things have happened. Dow Chemical building its new world headquarters, the expansion at the Midland Regional Health Center, Mid-Michigan Regional Health. They've done 2 or 3 major expansions. Our own Northwood University has been a major player in construction phases. Our new housing complex. We're now starting, as you know, our 2nd major housing complex addition. The DeVos Graduate School, the renovation of the old DeVos Graduate School into the Plaster Center. Our home, the McNair Center, is a 6,000 square foot brand new addition to the building on campus. So those are the kinds of things that are helping to drive the economy, and certainly the Dow-DuPont merger and the kinds of things that promises for the economy. Those are all factors that have been major players in the growth in Midland in the last 5 years or so.
Great. Well, it's always good news for us. We love to talk about Michigan's success. You've maybe people saw your op-ed last week in the Detroit News talking about Governor Snyder's tenure and how successful it was. What are some of the things you're going to be keeping an eye on looking to a new term with the new governor?
Well, certainly I think that, we've been talking about, and we in essence use the study as a scorecard. So looking at scoring the Whitmer administration, a lot of good things have happened under Governor Snyder. He hasn't been perfect, but I'd give him an 8 or a 9 out of a 10. He had a lot of very difficult things to tackle, difficult things on his plate when he became governor. And as you think about where we are now, he has reformed taxes. He has cut out or reformed over 1,000 regulations that made it difficult for business to compete. He took Detroit through bankruptcy. That was a very, very difficult thing for anybody to do. And, Michigan has, again, been one of the shining stars as a result of tax reform, regulatory reform, and in getting the burden under control for the city of Detroit, giving my hometown a chance to rebound and grow. So when you're looking at measurements for the new governor, we need to make certain that we continue to grow. So the major indicator is going to be gross domestic product or gross state product growth. And as a result, what are we doing with taxes? What are we doing with regulations? What are we doing to keep the cost of living in Michigan very reasonable and have the economic growth to create jobs? So those are the key measures we'll look at: GDP growth, job creation, unemployment, taxes, regulation.
Fantastic. Well, we certainly look forward to an update on that. Let's jump into the national outlook and talk about how our economy did in October and early November. We obviously had an election that impacted some things. So how generally are we doing today?
Well, as we always look at things at the McNair Center, we realize that the cornerstone of our great economy is the entrepreneur. And so when we look at, we always argue that the wellspring of human progress, or the economic cycle of human progress, starts with the entrepreneur. And as you see the slide that we've put up the last couple of shows, we just want to remind the viewers that it's the small business that creates most of the jobs in the United States. It's the entrepreneur. And if we think about here in Midland, it was over 100 years ago that this young entrepreneur named H.H. Dow was starting a small business that today has become in many measurements, Dow DuPont is now the largest chemical company in the world, if not in other measurements, the second largest. And so you think about what those entrepreneurs, both Dow and DuPont, did with, little garage companies, if you will, that became major global companies. And in the end, we argue that you have to make certain that you're satisfying the customer. And so we have to have a marketplace that allows customers to be as well served as possible by companies that are nimble, by companies that can reinvest, by companies that are allowed to keep and hold their profits. And so, that the slide that you see is just something that we use on a regular basis in the economics area. And if you look at the November midterm elections, number one, both sides are claiming victory. The Democrats are claiming victory because they were able to, rather impressively, it wasn't a blue wave, but they were able to take the House. And the Republicans are bragging because the Republicans, especially as of yesterday's decisions in Florida, they're going to keep the Senate, and they're going to end up with 51 or 52 seats in the Senate, so they will hold the Senate majority. And so you look at it and you say, what did this election tell us? The election was the largest voter turnout by percentage in the United States, literally in modern history. In over 100 years, there's not been that percentage of voters turning out for an election. 116 million people voted. And just to give you a point of reference, there's less than 160 million people working in the United States today. So a very high percentage of eligible voters, almost 50%. retirees, young people just maybe college age that are voting for the first time. The thing that is important is you'd have to go back to 1914, where it was just over 50%, 50.4% voted. And that was a time in the United States when we were very ignorant, and back then women were not allowed to vote. So it's interesting that women were not allowed to vote, and women were major players in the election. In a lot of cases, the Republicans did not hold metropolitan areas or even state governments because women that normally voted Republican historically did not vote, and people call it the Trump effect. So it's interesting to see that when you're looking at the election, there were signs and signals to a number of individuals and a number of regions, and certainly to both political parties, that the youth voted heavily in the Democratic direction. Women voted more heavily, not, I wouldn't say in a landslide, but more heavily for Democrats that normally vote Republican. Men voted Republican and turned out in much higher numbers. And so the real concern that we have is not the gender bias or which gender did what, or what young and old did in terms of voting, as much as what is the mentality of the voter today. In other words, as we look at the elections, will we continue with regulatory reform? Will we continue with tax reform? And that's up for debate. That's in question today. And even if you look at what happened in California, and this is something that is not talked about a lot in the news, but Orange County, California, which was one of the Republican strongholds in Southern California. It was the home of Reaganomics. There were 5 members of the House of Representatives that were Republicans in the Orange County area. 2 of them decided not to run for re-election, and 3 ran for re-election. The Republicans lost all 5 seats. And that should tell you something, because that is an issue that I don't think is male-female related, but I do think is economics related. And what's important to understand is the issue there is the tax cut, because that tax cut actually increased taxes for Republicans in California, because the tax cut, as much as we say tax cuts are good for the economy, if you're a Republican in New York making a lot of money, your taxes just went up. You're a Republican in New Jersey making a lot of money, because of the Trump tax cuts, your tax rate, what you're paying in taxes, just went up. Same thing in California. And so there were some really close elections that may have been tipped by the tax cut, because people aren't voting necessarily what's best for the economy. They're voting their own pocket. And you see not just Republican women, but in some cases Republican men voting against the Republican candidate this time around in places like New Jersey, New York, California, because their taxes actually increased, because they weren't able to write off, they're no longer able to write off the same amount of their state and local income taxes on their federal tax return.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so the main message we think for the midterms is wait and see. Let's see where this takes us. But that's just kind of a quick overview. As you look at the jobs record, the economy is doing very well as it relates to the jobs report. In October, we created 250,000 new jobs. That was almost 50,000 more than most economists were expecting. The leading job creator was healthcare. Manufacturing was strong at 32,000. Construction was strong at 30,000. And construction at 30,000 in October it bodes well for the kind of activities that are happening. We're building a lot of structures that will begin the expansion in October and November, which is somewhat of an oddity in the certainly the north in the Northeast with the winter as part of it. Unemployment remained at 3.7%. If you measure October 2017 versus October 2018, it's down 0.4%. It literally is the lowest unemployment rate this country has experienced in nearly 50 years. So the economy in that regard is doing extremely well. And wages, the wage rate from October of 2018, tracing back to October of 2017, we're literally seeing the best single year of wage growth since 2009. So these are strong factors for the economy to look at. As we think about gross domestic product, we certainly have a strong economy. Mm-hmm. You would have to go back to President Clinton to see the kinds of numbers that we're experiencing right now. And if you look here at the slide, GDP growth is averaging well over 3% for the last year, and we could finish the actual calendar year at above 3%, which would be the first time we've done that since the Bush-Clinton era, and it obviously happened a lot more under President Clinton than it did under President Bush. President Obama never had a year where the average was above 3%, and as we've reported before, President Obama's 8 years in office averaged roughly 2% GDP growth. So GDP growth is strong, and we think it will continue to be strong. There's a bit of a concern that the prediction by the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, which we use as one of our key prognostication tools, is that the fourth quarter will be down a little bit, down to 2.8% GDP growth.
Now, there's something kind of special about third quarter GDP. It can be an indicator for the future. What, looking at these numbers, are you thinking about going into the fourth quarter and the first quarter of next year?
Well, it's interesting. I was watching Arthur Laffer, who is the famous economist who authored the Laffer curve, and maybe one of the shows maybe next show will show the Laffer curve. It's a very famous tax theory that goes back to before the birth of Christ, where some of the Phoenicians were working on tax policy and how much they should tax individuals. But the Laffer curve says there's an optimal tax rate, and if you tax above the tax rate, then you are going to force people out of business, and you'll have less tax revenue. And if you tax below the optimal tax rate, you're just letting people keep money that the government could have. They won't stop working, and they won't work more at a lower tax rate. So Laffer used to argue that a net tax rate of about 15% was optimal. Just recently, he was very laudatory of the president's tax cuts, and his argument is that it takes a while for these tax cuts to take effect, and I hope he's right. I see it slowing down. We haven't done our final forecast yet for 2018, but I see the economy slowing down a bit in 2019. He was just on a couple of news shows in the last week saying he sees the tax cuts taking a year to actually kick in, and the tax returns to be made to people in April and beyond, or really the beginning of 2019. And bottom line is he sees the economy growing at as strong a pace, if not stronger, in 2019. So, with economists, you get, if you have two economists, you get at least three opinions. But I think 2019 will be a good year, whether Nash is right or Laffer is right. I think GDP is going to be somewhere between 2.5% and 3% on average, would be my prediction right now for 2019. So still a very good year by historic standards.
Good.
And then if you look at, Mackenzie, the economy, one of the key indicators that we look at on a regular basis is business confidence. And business confidence is extremely high relative to to the economy and where it's been in the last decade. We're really looking at among the best consumer confidence levels since the year 2000. And if you look at the consumer confidence index, you can say, well, we're at a level that's almost as high as the last high, which was at just over 142 in September of 2000. But the thing that's promising and maybe validates what Dr. Laffer was talking about is there's the expectations index. That's the forward-thinking index for the consumer confidence index that the Conference Board produces. And the expectations index shows that the economy is looking strong. It looks out at about 3 to 4 months. So they're arguing that into early 2019, the economy looks strong. It doesn't say that it's not going to be strong beyond that, but that expectations index is a positive indicator that things are good, and they look like they should be getting better. The major index that we look at in terms of confidence is the small business confidence index, or what's oftentimes referred to as the small business optimism index, produced by the National Independent Business or Federation of Businesses. We are looking at historic levels. We're right now at 107.4. If you look at the data on this chart, it hit an all-time record high in August of 108.8. If you look at the data here, you can see that for the year we've hovered between 107, 106.9, and almost 109. But what is important is consider that we averaged 94 for the year 2014. If you look at the year 2015, we averaged just under 98. And if you look at 2016, we averaged just under 94. So confidence by small business has rocketed up during the Trump administration. Small business people are willing to take greater risks because of the tax cuts, because of the regulatory cuts, and quite frankly, they have more confidence in this president as it relates to the economy. In fact, just the other day, President Trump hit an all-time record of 53% confidence by the American people, according to a poll by Reuters, as it relates to managing the U.S. economy. So there's a lot of good things happening in that regard. We have concerns. Clearly, one of the major concerns that I have right now in the economy is the stock market. Last year, the stock market was up almost 24.5% for all of 2017. It closed the year with an all-time record high 9-month gain to gain to gain. So we had 9 months back-to-back gains in 2017. And the stock market closed the year at 24,719. This year, at one point, it was up 8% over that figure. It's unfortunate, but we cannot look at the stock market right now with any optimism, in my opinion. The stock market is barely up 1%. We've had a rather large retrenchment in the last month or so, and the stock market could be signaling this slowdown that I believe we could very well face in 2019. I don't see a recession, at least as of yet, in 2019, but the stock market is having a hard time breaking out of its current position of difficulty. And again, right now for the year to date, it's only up 0.8%. So we have some concerns about the stock market. And I think the things that are triggering our concern about the economy is, first and foremost, the national debt. Our national debt is now closing in on $22 trillion. $21.77 trillion is the total U.S. national debt. Our debt per citizen, per man, woman, and child, is just over $66,000 for the year. Our debt per taxpayer, which is probably the most important measure because these are the people that, at least in theory, have a job and could pay off the national debt. That's almost $178,500. So $178,377. If we divide it, we told all taxpayers, here's your share of the national debt. That's an awful lot of money per taxpayer. And for a household of four, the average home in the United States has mom, dad, and two kids. There it'd be over $264,000 per household. So our national debt needs to get under control. And I've said this for a long time. I don't believe that we have a tax/revenue problem as much as I believe we have a government spending problem. And we're running these deficits right now, and we are looking at increasing government spending if the Democrats in the House get one of their campaign promises, which would be health care for everyone. The real question is, where will that come from with all of our existing government programs? In a turbulent world, do we cut national defense? Our roads across the United States are in need of repair. Certainly it's one of the challenges that the new governor will have in Michigan. So, when you're looking at problems, where do we cut when it comes to our national debt? And then the solution oftentimes is, well, we need to raise taxes. I think as you look at things, you raise taxes, you're going to slow the economy. You're not going to grow the economy. It doesn't work raising taxes and growing the economy, especially when tax rates are where they are at today. Mm-hmm. And we don't want to return, in my opinion, to the days when we're looking at our tax rate on corporations being higher than that of China's. Mm-hmm. Being high, it's still higher than Russia's. We still have a tax rate that is higher than a number of our key competitors on business. Taxes got better on business in President Trump's last tax cut. I don't think we want to return to higher taxes. So the national debt remains a major concern for us. As you look at the whole aspect of what's happening in the economy as it relates to the prime interest rate. Now, the prime interest rate is the rate you charge your best corporate customers. And so when you're looking at a business, the interest cost is key. And by the way, it's not just key for business, but if you went back, and we're not going to the previous slide and looked at the national debt, our interest rate on the national debt, the average interest rate has been roughly 2%. That's going up. And as interest rates go up, the government borrows from the same capital markets that we borrow from. And interest on the national debt is going to be going up substantially if interest rates continue to grow. And it wasn't even a top 30 item on the U.S. national debt. I'm sorry, on the U.S. national budget, meaning interest on the national debt. It's in the top 5 today. And interest on the national debt becomes a problem. But if you look at the U.S. prime rate, which is the rate you charge your best corporate customers, the prime rate has increased rather dramatically just this year. It's gone from 4.5% to 5.25% in less than a year. And there are a lot of people that think it could be at 5%, 5.5% to 6% within the next year. That means higher cost of doing business. That means lower profits. The more you pay in interest, the less you can do to grow your business, the less you can do to employ more people. Mm-hmm. So in some cases, higher interest rates mean good things for savings accounts, for bonds. But in business, this is going to be a challenge. And as you see, we're still well below the historic yearly average of just about 6.5%. But higher interest rates aren't always a good thing as it relates to businesses that are trying to become established and or to grow. If you see, though, we're way off our all-time record high for the prime rate, which was December of 1980, in which the prime rate, the rate you charge your best corporate customers to borrow money, was 21.5%. And I remember small businesses, my father-in-law included, who had a pharmacy in Western New York, he was paying 2 points above prime to borrow money, which was one of the reasons why the economy had such a terrible time at the end of the Carter administration in 1980. So as you think about the economy, our big concerns are the national debt and what we're going to do with it, and certainly interest rates. And then as you look to the future, the economy is very strong, and there's no reason why the American dream cannot continue. I think the economy is in a position to move forward in a very successful way if we decide to tackle the national debt and do it via spending reductions and economic growth rather than tax increases. I also believe that the new programs, we need to come up with market solutions to expand health care. We should do everything we can to expand health care to the greatest amount of the population possible. How we do it's going to be the great decision. Mm-hmm. I think that young people today are very concerned about what's happening. I remember when I voted for Ronald Reagan, college campuses across the country voted for Reagan. And now you look at it in the 2016 elections, the number one vote getter for college and university students in the primary was Bernie Sanders. If you look at the number of individuals that have been elected to this Congress that are avowed socialists, mm-hmm. It's a concern. So in essence, will we be a meritocracy that believes in the old adage that the cream will rise to the top, that in a free and competitive economy, the American dream can be achieved, that you will be better off than your parents were? Do we believe in that? Can it still exist? I really think that that's the underlying debate that's taking place in this country. Can we continue to have a free and competitive economy that literally is the envy of the world, or are we going to go more toward a European socialist model, which I believe will make us much less competitive and make the second half of the 21st century clearly the century of places like China and India, mm-hmm. rather than the United States. So that's what we're looking at. That's what we're concerned with this month's monthly economic outlook.
That makes sense. Those are big concerns. We happy to bring to you today Economics in Action, the October-November edition of our monthly economic outlook, and a little bit on our Michigan Chamber study. You can learn more, see the study, read the executive summary or the full study at McNair.Northwood.edu. If you have any questions or want to give us any feedback on the show, McNair@Northwood.edu is our email address, and we welcome those comments. We coming at you from Northwood University, where the American dream is alive and well, and we will see you next month. Thank you.